He thought she was just another black woman he could threaten, until she walked into court and destroyed his career. The rain-slicked stretch of Highway 25 outside Asheville, North Carolina, shimmered under the faint glow of flickering streetlights, their amber beams bouncing off wet pavement. It was late, past 11 p.m., and the road lay nearly deserted, save for the occasional car slicing through the drizzle, headlights piercing the dark like fleeting ghosts. Lieutenant Commander Maya Jackson gripped the steering wheel of her modest sedan, her fingers tapping a soft rhythm against the leather, syncing with the mellow jazz spilling from the speakers. The 2-hour drive from Charlotte had worn her thin, her shoulders aching beneath a simple black hoodie, her jeans creased from sitting too long. Her dark hair was swept into a loose bun, strands escaping to frame her face, a face that carried the quiet strength of 15 years in the Navy. Though tonight, out of uniform, she blended into the anonymity of the road, or so she thought. A flash of red and blue erupted in her rearview mirror, sharp and sudden, jolting her from the tune she'd been humming. Her stomach tightened. Not fear, not yet, but a weary resignation that sank like a stone. She'd been here before, knew the script too well. With a slow breath, she signaled, eased into the right lane, and coasted onto the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath her tires. The car settled into park, and Maya kept her hands visible, 10 and 2 on the wheel, her training kicking in, a reflex honed by years of discipline. The patrol car stopped behind her, its lights pulsing through the rain, staining the night in stark hues. The officer took his time emerging, each second stretching taut, and when he finally stepped out, his heavy boots scuffed the asphalt with deliberate weight. Maya watched him in the side mirror, her pulse steady but her jaw tightening as he approached. He moved like a man accustomed to being obeyed, shoulders squared, one hand resting on his belt near his holster, the other flicking on a flashlight that cut through the drizzle. The beam danced across her window as he tapped it with a knuckle. Impatient, she rolled it down, the cool night air rushing in, and caught the glint of his badge. Holt, no first name, just Holt, a fittingly blunt label for the man staring down at her. "License and registration," he said, his voice flat, clipped, devoid of warmth or preamble. "No, hello. No, ma'am. Just a demand," laced with the kind of practiced authority that expected compliance. Maya met his gaze through the mirror, his pale eyes narrowing under the brim of his cap, then reached slowly into the glove compartment, her movements deliberate, measured. "Was I speeding, officer?" she asked, her tone calm, even as she handed over her documents. She wasn't rattled, just tired, the exhaustion of a long day bleeding into her voice. Holt didn't answer right away. He snatched the papers, holding them just beyond her reach, his flashlight sweeping her car. Dashboard, back seat, floor, as if hunting for something to pin on her. "Tail lights out," he said finally, his words curt, dismissive. Maya frowned, a flicker of disbelief sparking in her chest. "That can't be right," she replied, keeping her voice level despite the itch of irritation. "I had it checked a few weeks ago." He looked at her then, really looked, and a beat of silence hung heavy between them, the rain tapping a soft rhythm against the roof. "You arguing with me?" Holt's tone sharpened, a challenge threading through it, his smirk barely concealed. Maya felt the air shift, that unspoken pivot where power flexed, testing for weakness. She'd seen it in barracks, in overseas ops, in the faces of men who mistook her calm for submission. Her training told her to de-escalate, but her spine stiffened, her rights a quiet shield she wouldn't discard. "I'm just saying," she answered, her voice still steady. "My taillights were fine last check. If there's a problem, I'll fix it." Holt tilted his head, the smirk fading into something harder. "Step out of the car," he snapped, cutting her off as if she hadn't spoken. Maya exhaled slowly, her fingers drumming once against the wheel, a fleeting release of the frustration coiling in her gut. She glanced at the empty road ahead, no cars, no witnesses, and felt the isolation settle like damp fog. "Mind telling me why?" she asked, her tone even but firm, testing the waters. Holt's smirk returned, colder now. "Because I said so." The words landed like a slap, casual yet loaded, and Maya let them hang there, her jaw tightening. She unbuckled her seatbelt, the click loud in the tense quiet, and pushed the door open, stepping onto the slick pavement. The night air bit at her skin, cooler than she'd expected, and she stood tall, 5'8", relaxed but poised, her hoodie doing little to hint at the steel beneath. She wasn't looking for a fight, but she wouldn't cower either. Holt stepped back, his flashlight raking over her, sizing her up, her jeans, her sneakers, her black skin, and she felt the weight of his judgment, heavy and familiar. "Turn around, hands on the car," he ordered, his voice gruff, expectant. Maya hesitated, her pulse ticking up a notch. "For what reason?" she asked, calm but unyielding, her eyes locking onto his. Holt's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of annoyance. Maybe amusement. He clearly wasn't used to pushback. "Are you resisting?" he barked, stepping closer, his bulk looming in the dim light. "No," she said, holding her ground, her voice a quiet blade. "I'm asking a question." Something flickered across his face. Irritation, a crack in his control, and he reached for his radio, his movements sharp. "Got a non-compliant driver here?" he muttered into it, then louder. "Turn around." Maya's heart thudded, but her face stayed neutral, her military calm a lifeline. "Officer, I need you to understand something," she said, low and firm. "I know my rights, and I know what you can't do." Holt's jaw tensed, his eyes narrowing to slits. "You're under arrest," he snapped, lunging for her wrist. Maya stepped back, just enough to dodge his grip, her reflexes honed by years of drills. "Under arrest for what?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly, incredulity breaking through. Holt yanked out his cuffs, the metal glinting. "Obstructing an officer," he growled, seizing her arm this time, twisting it behind her with a force that stung. She didn't fight, knew better than to give him the excuse, but the indignity burned, hot and bitter. He tightened the cuffs, deliberately too snug, the metal biting into her wrists as he shoved her toward his patrol car. "You don't know what you're doing," she murmured, her voice steady despite the flare of pain. Holt chuckled, a low, smug sound, slamming the door after her. "Lady, I know exactly what I'm doing." The lock clicked, sealing her in the hard plastic back seat, and Maya sat still, her breathing even, her mind racing. He strutted back to his car, oblivious to the storm he'd just ignited. Holt thought he'd won, but he didn't know her. Not yet. And that, she vowed silently, would be his undoing. The back seat of Officer Nathan Holt's patrol car was a cage of cold plastic and stale air, the faint hum of the engine vibrating through the floor as it rolled toward the Asheville police station. Lieutenant Commander Maya Jackson sat upright, her wrists chafing against the tight cuffs, each bump in the road sending a sharp twinge up her arms. The red and blue lights flickered outside, staining the wet pavement in rhythmic pulses, but inside, the dim glow of the dashboard cast shadows across her face, a face carved with calm, her dark eyes steady despite the simmer of anger beneath. She'd endured worse. Desert heat, hostile checkpoints, the weight of command. But this was a different beast, a petty tyranny cloaked in a badge, and it gnawed at her with a quiet, insistent fury. Holt drove with a swagger she could feel through the partition, whistling a tuneless melody, his hands loose on the wheel. "You know," he said after a stretch of silence, his voice dripping with condescension, "most folks just keep quiet when I tell them to step out." Maya exhaled sharply through her nose, her jaw tightening. "And most officers don't arrest people for asking about a traffic stop," she replied, her tone even but edged, slicing through his smugness. He laughed, a short, grating bark, shaking his head. "Lady, you must think you're somebody." She met his gaze in the rearview mirror, her voice low, deliberate. "I don't think... I know." Holt's knuckles flexed on the wheel, a flicker of irritation cracking his facade, but he masked it with a smirk. "Military, huh?" he guessed, his tone shifting to mock curiosity. "Got that attitude, that above-the-law vibe. Bet you thought I'd back off if you flexed it." Maya stayed silent, letting him ramble, her mind already turning over the next steps. He didn't know her rank, her record, her reach, and that ignorance was her edge. The station loomed ahead, a squat brick building off Highway 25, its parking lot sparse under the drizzle. Holt parked with a jolt, killing the engine, and turned to peer at her through the partition. "Gotta say," he murmured, his smirk widening, "I love when they make it easy." Maya's lips pressed thin, but she held his stare, unflinching, as he swung the door open. "Let's go," he ordered, yanking her out with a grip that pinched her arm. The cuffs dug deeper, a deliberate twist of petty power, and she bit back a wince, keeping her head high as he marched her inside. The holding area reeked of old coffee and sweat, its metal bench cold against her jeans as Holt shoved her through booking. Fingerprints, mugshot, the rote indignity of it all. The desk sergeant, a tired man named Officer Reese, barely glanced up, his pen scratching across forms with mechanical detachment. "Enjoy your stay," Holt sneered, uncuffing her just long enough to push her into a cell, the bars clanging shut with a hollow clang. He tapped them lightly, smirking, then sauntered off, his boots echoing down the hall. Maya sank onto the bench, rolling her shoulders to ease the ache, her wrists red and raw. One night, she told herself. One night, and this would turn. The cell was stark, 4 gray walls, a flickering bulb, a steel door beyond. But she'd faced worse confinement. Her mind steadied, military discipline a lifeline as she replayed the stop. Holt's smirk, his baseless arrest, the taillight lie. Anger simmered, but she channeled it, her breathing slow, controlled. Then Holt's footsteps returned, heavy and deliberate, and he loomed before the bars, arms crossed, that smirk still plastered on. "Comfy?" he asked, his tone mocking. She didn't reply, her silence a wall, and he tilted his head, stepping closer. "If you'd played along, you wouldn't be here." Maya leaned forward slightly, a slow smile curling her lips. "Oh, I'm exactly where I need to be." His smirk faltered, a crack in his armor, and she savored it, the first hint of doubt in his pale eyes. He scoffed, covering it fast. "No one's coming for you tonight, lady. Guess you'll have time to rethink that attitude." She watched him go, unmoved, her certainty a quiet fire. He was wrong. People were already moving. Minutes later, softer steps approached. A younger officer, Reese's partner, Officer Patel, late 20s, clipboard in hand, stopped short, his dark eyes darting nervously. Sergeant," he called down the hall, his voice unsteady. "We got a call. You need to see this." Holt's gruff reply filtered back, annoyed, and he stormed into view, frowning. "What?" he snapped. Patel hesitated, glancing at Maya, then lowered his voice. But she caught fragments. "Lawyer. Higher up. Why she's held." Holt's tone sharpened, his irritation palpable, and he shot her a glare before stalking off with Patel. Maya leaned back, her lips twitching. The tide was turning. Morning light filtered through the cell's narrow window, gray and thin, when the door clanked open. Patel stood there, clipboard tucked under his arm, his face flushed. "Lieutenant Commander Jackson," he said, formal now, "you're being released, pending review." Maya rose, her wrists still sore but her spirit unbroken, and stepped out, brushing past him with a nod. "Took long enough," she murmured, her voice dry. In the lobby, Laura Bennett waited, her attorney, a wiry woman in her 50s, her gray suit crisp, her blue eyes sharp. "Maya," Laura greeted, her tone clipped but warm, handing over a coffee. "Navy brass called. Your CO's pissed. This is blowing up." Maya sipped the coffee, the warmth steadying her. "Good," she said, her voice low, fierce. "Let it." Laura flipped open a tablet, scrolling. "Body cam's already with IA. Holt's got a history, and they're digging. You're in court tomorrow." Maya's jaw tightened, a flicker of exhaustion warring with resolve. She'd known from the moment Holt cuffed her, this wasn't just about her. It was about every stop he'd made, every line he'd crossed, every life he'd marked with his arrogance. Back at her apartment, Maya sank into a chair, the quiet a stark contrast to the cell's clamor. Her phone buzzed. Captain Ellis, her commanding officer. "Jackson," his gruff voice crackled. "You holding up?" She smiled faintly. "Always, sir." A pause, then. "Holt's done. Suspended already. IA's tearing into him. You ready for court?" Maya glanced at her reflection in the window. Steady, unbowed. "Yes. Sir, he picked the wrong fight." Ellis chuckled, a rare sound. "That's my girl." Sleep came fitfully, but when it did, it was dreamless. Her anger a fuel, her purpose a shield. Holt thought he'd won that night, but he'd misjudged her strength, her reach. Tomorrow she'd face him again. Not as a detainee, but as the force that would unravel him. The fight was just beginning, and Maya Jackson didn't back down. Not ever. The Asheville courthouse loomed under a gray dawn, its stone facade slick with the remnants of last night's rain. Inside, the air was brisk, laced with the faint scent of polish and old paper, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones if you lingered too long. Lieutenant Commander Maya Jackson stood near the defendant's table, her navy blazer crisp over a white blouse, her posture relaxed but her dark eyes sharp as honed steel. No cuffs marred her wrists now, no cell confined her, just the steady hum of purpose coursing through her veins. Beside her, Laura Bennett shuffled papers with surgical precision, her gray suit a quiet armor, her blue eyes flicking over notes without a hint of wasted motion. The courtroom buzzed softly. Reporters in the back, a handful of locals in the gallery, their whispers a low current beneath the weight of what was coming. The heavy doors creaked open, and Officer Nathan Holt strode in, his uniform pressed, his chin lifted as if he still owned the space. But Maya caught the stiffness in his step, the faint tightening around his mouth, a man clinging to bravado he no longer fully felt. His pale eyes darted to her, then away a crack in his facade she savored silently. He settled at the prosecution's table, arms crossed, his jaw set, but the air around him felt thinner, less certain. Maya's lips twitched. Good. Judge Henry Caldwell entered, his robes rustling, his weathered face etched with the weariness of decades on the bench. He adjusted his glasses, peering at the files with a sigh that bespoke routine, then rapped his gavel. "Let's get to it," he said, his voice gravelly, cutting through the room's hum. The prosecutor, David Reese, a lean man in his 40s with a neatly combed salt and pepper mane, stood clearing his throat. "Your Honor, we contend that Lieutenant Commander Maya Jackson was unlawfully detained by Officer Nathan Holt without probable cause. Furthermore, evidence suggests a pattern of misconduct tied to this officer." A murmur rippled through the gallery, heads turning. Holt shifted, his knuckles whitening on the table's edge. Judge Caldwell raised an eyebrow, peering over his glasses at Holt. "Sergeant Holt, care to explain?" Holt leaned forward, his voice steady but strained. "Your Honor, the defendant was uncooperative during a routine stop, refused to comply." Reese cut in, his tone smooth but piercing. "Uncooperative?" He lifted a document, holding it aloft. "Commander Jackson's record. Naval Academy graduate, multiple commendations, spotless history, no citations. You're telling me she posed such a threat over a taillight that you arrested her?" Holt's mouth opened, then shut, the silence a noose tightening around him. Reese pressed on, flipping pages. "An internal review shows Officer Holt's stops disproportionately target black drivers. Dozens flagged in 5 years." The murmurs grew louder, a tide of unease swelling. Holt's face darkened, his jaw grinding, but Caldwell's sigh silenced the room. "Sergeant, I don't like this picture," he said, his tone heavy. "Let's see the footage." A screen descended and the body cam video played. Holt barked orders, Maya's calm questions, the cuffs snapping shut with petty force. Her voice echoed, firm but measured. "I know my rights." The room stilled, the smugness in Holt's smirk on full display, his shove into the patrol car a damning punctuation. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Caldwell steepled his fingers, his gaze piercing Holt. "You violated protocol, conducted an unlawful arrest, and omitted key details from your report. Charges against Commander Jackson are dismissed." His gavel struck, a sharp crack. "And I'm ordering a full investigation into your conduct, Sergeant." Holt's face flushed crimson, his fists clenching as the gallery erupted. Gasps, whispers, a reporter's pen scratching furiously. Maya exhaled, slow and controlled, her victory a quiet fire in her chest. She gathered her papers, her movements steady, and spared Holt one glance. No gloat, just certainty, as he stormed out, his boots pounding the floor. Laura squeezed her arm, a rare smile breaking her stoic mask. "He's done," she murmured. Maya nodded, her throat tight. "Not yet, but close." Outside, Holt barreled down the hall, his pulse hammering, the stares of officers and staff boring into him like needles. "Sergeant Holt!" A voice cut through, crisp and unyielding. He turned. Chief Samuel Hargrove stood there, arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable beneath a shock of gray hair. "My office," Hargrove said, his nod curt. Holt followed, his stomach twisting, the bravado he'd worn like armor peeling away with each step. The door shut behind them, and Hargrove's tone dropped, cold as steel. "What the hell were you thinking?" Holt exhaled, sharp and defensive. I was doing my job. Hargrove scoffed, tossing a file onto the desk with a thud. That's not what this says. Body cam. Arrest logs, a Navy officer you didn't even ID. You think this stays quiet? Holt's nostrils flared. She was disrespectful. She questioned you, Hargrove snapped, leaning forward. That's not a crime. You targeted her, and you've got a trail of stops just like it. Holt looked away, grinding his teeth, but Hargrove's voice hardened. DA's reviewing your cases, suspensions immediate. IA's digging, and if they find what I expect, you're finished. The words hit like a sledgehammer, Holt's world unraveling in the cramped office. He stormed out, suspended, the whispers trailing him like shadows. Across town, Maya sat in a cafe, stirring coffee, her phone buzzing with headlines. Navy officer wrongfully arrested, cop suspended. She sipped, the warmth steadying her, and answered a call from Captain Ellis. Jackson, you holding up? He asked, gruff but warm. Always, sir, she replied, a faint smile tugging her lips. Mayor's office wants to honor you, he added. She smirked. I'll pass. Rather keep this moving forward. The fight wasn't over. Later at her apartment, Maya stood by the window, the Blue Ridge Mountains a dark silhouette against the dusk. Her wrists still bore faint marks, a reminder of Holt's cuffs, but her resolve burned brighter. A knock, her neighbor, Jamal, a lanky teen with a shy grin. Saw the news, Ms. Maya. You're badass, he said, clutching a basketball. She chuckled, soft but genuine. Just doing what's right. His mom, Tanya, peeked out, her voice warm. You gave us hope today. Maya's chest tightened, the weight of their words settling deep. This wasn't just her win. It was for Jamal, for Tanya, for every black face Holt had stopped, every voice silenced. She declined the mayor's spotlight, but spoke at a community forum days later, her words steady. Change starts when we demand it. The room listened. Cops, activists, kids. Her story a spark igniting calls for reform. Holt faced charges weeks on, his badge stripped, but Maya knew one man's fall wasn't enough. She'd keep pushing, her fight a beacon in Asheville's quiet hills, proving power unchecked crumbles when met with courage. As Asheville's dusk deepened, Maya's silhouette against the mountains stood as a quiet testament, a woman who turned a rainy night's injustice into a reckoning. This isn't just Holt's fall or Maya's win. It's a roar against power misused, a reminder that courage can topple arrogance. One stop, one fight in a ripple of change. Doesn't it make you wonder? How many Mayas are out there, unsung, unshaken, reshaping the world one stand at a time? Thank you so much for writing this journey with us. It's been an honor to share Maya's story with you. If it stirred your heart or fired you up, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales that challenge and uplift. Drop a comment below. Did Maya's resolve hit home? Have you seen justice rise against the odds? We'd love to hear your voice. Thanks again, and see you next time. Keep standing tall.